and welcome to the final fourth video on the Applied HRM module. So this video will look at the project and go over the brief in a bit more detail, and the video will break the brief down into three areas. So question one, which is to do with the people management strategy. Question two, which is all to do with the HR practices and the evaluation and conclusions, and then the final element, question three, is the recommendations. Of course, above and beyond that, you'll also need to include obviously a front cover page with your name on and names, then a content sheet in terms of breaking down the contents of the project, topics and obviously page number. And then after the content sheet you'll have a background as the template on Moodle shows. Then obviously once you've done your background to the company, then you can launch straight in then to question one. So the first question is all to do with the people management strategy. It's worth 15 marks, and what you need to do here is to describe what the strategy is, and of course whether it's explicit or whether it's implicit, and so there could well be a HR strategy, so of course it's going to be explicit, or there might not be a HR strategy, which is obviously it means it's implicit in terms of how people management happens on a day-to-day basis. What I'd like you to do though as part of that people management strategy is use the guest model, the stereotypes model, to analyze the current strategy, implicit or explicit, and show whether or not the strategy is HRM or personal management. Now of course if you have a HR strategy, it's more than likely going to be HRM, but regardless I still like you to do that. Because if you do have a HR strategy and you use the guest stereotypes, the analysis could show that it's PM rather than HRM, which means that the HR strategy could be more rhetoric rather than actual reality. So use the guest stereotypes model, analyze the current people management strategy, look at documentation as in the HR strategy if there's one explicit, or the staff handbook if it's explicit, and then show whether or not it's more HRM versus personal management. You can also use the story model, which is in the first set of slides as well, and if you wanted to reinforce the HRM strategy, if there was one implicit, then you can use the story model to show more evidence. Overall, if there is a HRM style which is more predominant, or strategy if you like, then what you can do then is maybe have a look to see what elements of best fit there are, and that best fit then could come from providing description from some of the text from the HR strategy if it's explicit. It could be some text from the website, or it could be some text from the staff handbook, just showing a deliberate attempt to match the needs of the overall organisation to some type of HR focus. So remember we looked at Liverpool John Moores University's HR strategy. That was an explicit attempt to match a HR strategy to the needs, or add value to the needs of the organisation. So that's the first question, which is pretty much analysing the current people management strategy, or style if you want to call it that. It's probably got to be more implicit than explicit, and overall make sure that you use the guest stereotypes to analyse that strategy, explicit or implicit, and to show whether it's HRM or personal management. Again, just to re-emphasize, there could well be a good HR strategy on paper which is explicit, but then you use the guest stereotypes and the reality is that actually it's more PM than HRM, and that can happen as well. So remember that rhetoric versus reality debate. So that's 15 marks. It's a difficult area to explore. you will need to try and find some evidence in the organisation for these styles if you can, especially if you want to argue for the HRM best fit style. So moving on to question 2. So the focus here is to analyse 3 HR practices. So the bottom line here is that with each practice you need to describe the process, and you'll get marks for that. So describe, for example, recruitment, how it works, how does the process happen in your organisation. And at the same time as describing the process, to get higher marks you then need to evaluate that process by showing some strengths and weaknesses. You can do that in the text while you're discussing the recruitment process, or you can leave a number of bullet points at the end of each practice as conclusions, just to show what the strengths and weaknesses are. But what I'd like you to do is try and evaluate the process in the text as you're describing the process, and say this is good or this is a weakness, and use your own logic, which is fine, you'll get marks for that. But for a top mark, to evaluate the practices, obviously the process of each one, it's good to use try and use research from HR books, course manual or case studies to show good practice, and then you'll get a higher mark then. Obviously each practice, the evaluation is worth 20 marks per practice. So if you're able to bring literature in to show this is good because Armstrong suggests this or wherever, then you'll get 18 to 20 marks then for the practice then. Above and beyond the process, showing the strengths and weaknesses, and then bringing in some research to back it up, and that's good. Remember to include a conclusion. You can conclude at the end of each practice, or you can have one big conclusion at the end of the 3 practices, but that's vital that you have a conclusion. And if you wish, you can have a SWOT diagram at the end of each practice, or have a big one at the end before you make the recommendations, obviously in the conclusion. So that's question 2, 3 HR practices. Remember to describe what's going on in your company, how it works. If you have any sort of documentation, you can stick it in the back of the project as an appendix, and that should be fine. The final element then of question 3 is all about the recommendations, and the key here is to make recommendations that flow or follow on from the conclusions and practices that you've just discussed in question 2. So make sure that there's no new recommendations or new issues that you're recommending to sort out that have not been mentioned in the HR practices. So let's say, for example, in the recruitment stage on one of the practices, you mentioned that time to recruit was very slow. A recommendation then obviously could follow on from conclusions to say that there needs to be an update of the system, online recruitment or wherever it is, to speed the process up to enable faster, more adaptable recruitment, and that could be a recommendation. So that's the key. Make sure the recommendations then are linked back to the practices. Put them in priority order, you'll get marks for that, and also maybe consider resource issues in terms of costing of these recommendations. Now, more importantly, the implications for the recommendations around organisational resistance and change. So that's question 3. Ensure that you obviously put the recommendations there, maybe use bullet points, and I would put the recommendations under the headings of the practices. So you could put recommendations recruitment, recommendations training, recommendations reward, or whichever you wish to include. So above and beyond questions 3 then at the end, obviously include references, and maybe include a breakdown of the work as well, just to show who did what. So John did this, Mary did that, just to show the workings out as to who did what. Obviously, as part of the project, everybody gets the same mark, and just one person within each group needs to submit the project. So good luck with that. And if you have any issues around the project or have any questions, please feel free to drop me an email. Thank you.